Welcome to Successful Parenting, where we, Jackie Rue and Robin Choquette, share practical skills for families to build resilience and healthy connections. As practicing professionals and parents ourselves, we hope this podcast is a resource for parents to grow, reflect, and learn more about themselves and their children. Our approach is simple, tangible, and most importantly, we lead with compassion for the integrity of the families we serve. This podcast should not be taken as medical advice and is intended for informational purposes only. We love our work, and we can't wait to watch families gain confidence and open themselves up to new ways of successful parenting.
Good afternoon, Robin.
Good afternoon, Jackie. How are you today?
I am doing good. My dog, my pup, as you know, had some surgery this week,
Yeah.
ACL surgery. She is recovering with us, but it's her second one. Typically, when you get one, a year later, you have to get the second done.
I did not know that one.
Yeah. Yes. But she is actually doing pretty well. So that is good. She is getting very spoiled and we are taking good care of her. So that is good.
She is such a sweet dog. So sweet. Just those eyes.
She is. I adopted her during the pandemic. We have a running joke where we picked her because I had met this rescue and they had these dogs that they took off of a truck and she refused to get back on the truck. And so there you go. She came home with us. It's been good. I am super excited about our guest speaker today. You know, we moved to the town we are in, a suburb in Illinois of Chicago. I think we have been here for roughly 17 years. It was shortly after we moved to our community that we had heard about Chelsea Laliberte Barnes. She is actually nationally known for her advocacy to bring compassion and justice to patients and families. She has brought change on a state and federal level. She has brought change to communities. She's worked with police departments. She's worked with schools. She's been featured in the Tribune, the Sun-Times, the Today Show. I mean, tons of media outlets. It has made such an impact on treatment programs and the education on overdose. So I'm really excited. And I think parents, this is a topic that, we need to know about. And I love my community and I love our surrounding communities. We do a great job of putting our head in the sand. We have had many overdoses in our community between the ages of 18 and 22. It really isn't talked about, honestly. And these cases really don't get talked about. And so I think for many families, I hear this doesn't happen in my area or this doesn't happen in our schools. The problem is it really does. So I'm excited, Chelsea, to have this conversation with you and welcome. I'm just so excited to have you on today.
Welcome, Chelsea.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm flattered and honored, and I'm excited to talk to you guys. Thanks for what you do.
Oh, thank you. It's so important, the work that you do and the changes you're making. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
I know that this topic is near and dear to your heart, and you have firsthand experience. Do you want to just tell a little bit about why you started Live for Lali and just anything you want to share about your story?
Sure. Every nonprofit that makes an impact locally has a story behind it, and we are no different. My brother, Alex, who was 3.5 years younger than me, died from an accidental overdose in our home in Buffalo Grove, which is a pretty upper middle class suburb of Chicago in 2008. So we're going back, it's kind of crazy. I think about 2008, not that long ago, but it really was, 14 years ago at the height of this recognition that we have an issue with opioid pain medications. And when Alex died, my parents and I had known for a very long time that he was struggling with something. But as you said so eloquently, Jackie, they had their head in the sand. You don't want to see as a parent, because I'm a parent too, you don't want to see the negative. You don't want to see that there's a problem brewing. You want to see all the things that you hope your children would be, right? So you sort of dig your head there and you don't want to accept what's going on. The thing with drug use, and this is definitely especially for Alex, was that he was so good at hiding it.
Oh, yeah.
He did not want us to know how much he was suffering. So he really did what he could to hide it. He got good grades. There's really nothing you could see on the outside that would have indicated like, oh, Alex is really struggling, except for the weed smoke that followed him around pretty much everywhere he went. But even with that, growing up, especially in the Jewish community, it's like that even wasn't really a big deal to people. That was sort of overly normalized as, oh, it's just weed, So when he died, we were sitting in our couch and at the Shiva, which is a the way Jews mourn their loved ones, for those of you who don't know, just sat on the couch. And one of Alex's friends said to me, he's not the first, he's not going to be the last. And if you guys want to do something about this, we will support you. And this is like a 20-year-old saying this.
Wow.
So I wanted to know what he meant. I didn't know what he meant, and I wanted to know what he meant. And so a week later, we filed Live for Lali as a nonprofit. We didn't know what the heck we were going to do. All we knew was that we just wanted to do something because, when you lose somebody so suddenly like that you love so deeply, there's nothing that you wouldn't do to get that person back. And there's also nothing so big for us we didn't feel like we could talk about. We'll never go through that pain or shame or anything much worse, than that. So it was really important for us to do something about it. I think of the Jewish sort of tenet of tikkun olam, which is when you help one person, you help the world. And that's really what we sort of approach this with. So for the first 3 years, all we recognized that we needed to do was just talk about it. And nobody was talking about it, right? We were still, again, our heads were buried. And there wasn't a lot of information even coming from local police departments. They didn't understand why it was happening in the way that it was. The government didn't really have a good sense of where is this coming from and why is this happening, that they were willing to sort of expose to the country. There was a lot of sort of behind the scenes things going on with the pill issue and pharma and insurance and all of that. So we took it upon ourselves to be the beacon of education in the community, and people didn't like it. We were not overly accepted, when we were first started. We would go to, local events. We'd go to town halls. We would show up at school district meetings. And,
Wait, I've got to stop you, because is this because people did not want that information to be known that our community is struggling?
I think it was a combination of, we don't want to be the target community, right? Like, we don't want to be known as the community that has a heroin crisis going on.
Okay.
But we also don't know what to do about it because we can't track it. We don't see it in the way that we need to be seeing it. We can't evaluate what's going on. So there was a lot of sort of like political, like PR sort of approaches going on of how do we address this? Like, how do we acknowledge that there's a problem here, but also don't freak people out to think it's only happening here and the community isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing to protect the community members.
Okay.
So there was a lot of sort of, I think, shock in the way that we were doing it because it was sort of not the way that a lot of people do things. And we just decided to show up and talk about it.
Rip the Band-Aid off.
Rip the Band-Aid off. Like, we don't live in this sort of rose-colored world anymore. We can't. Our world has been turned upside down. The only thing that we could think of to do is just to continue creating awareness and learning about what is actually going on out there. Because this should not happen in America. Especially to a family that had a lot of resources, had a lot of support. This should not happen to any family. So it goes to show sort of that there is if this is happening in communities that have resources, what the heck is happening in communities that don't? And it really just sort of flipped the conversation of, well, we really need to be taking a look at this. We were just very bold and sort of brassy about it because, we love Alex and we miss him.
Yeah.
And we were devastated and grieving. And so this is how we grieved. And I got to say, it's changed my life and it's healed my life in ways I never thought that it would, to be able to do this in his honor.
Yeah, that process.
And it's been a long road. We've been around for now 15 years. So
do parents really know, the impact that this is really making, opiates and the fentanyl that's having on our community, in particular, our teens, our young adults? Do you think parents get it? And what is that impact that you're seeing for those ages?
I think now they do, in a way. I am in private practice. I treat adolescents and some children and families who are struggling with a variety of issues. And I specialize in trauma, anxiety, and addiction, substance use disorders. And what I can tell you is I think the amount of this advocacy movement has made a huge difference in that it's opened Pandora's box for people to really understand, like, what is Narcan? What is overdose? If my kid is using, what do I do? Like, these are the questions we want people to ask. But I think now they sort of might feel like they have more permission because other people are giving them permission. Whereas before, this was so overly stigmatized. Anybody who would come out with information about their own family were quote unquote those people.
Yeah.
We aren't those people. Nobody wants to
Not
believe that they
us.
have this. Not us, NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. But as I've continued on in my journey, I've realized, my goodness, so many Gen X and baby boomers had a parent who was an alcoholic or struggled with some sort of addiction. It's not uncommon, but connecting that to heroin or street drugs, it's different for people because a lot of people think about drug use as all of these separate little components, but it's really not. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's more to it than just what, they asking the question, why would your kid want to use drugs? Why wouldn't they? That's what I want us to be asking. If you take a look at the science, it's very clear. People want to feel good or feel better. And if people are in pain and you have something that can sort of take that pain away or lessen the effect or change our brains, you're going to seek that out. And that's why look at alcohol. Look at how accessible it is to chill out. That was my drug when I was using drugs. So alcohol is, I think, something we don't talk about nearly as much. But so I guess to answer your question, I think now that we have paid so much attention to this from local, state, and federal levels with media, celebrities coming out and talking about their journeys, I think we've sort of started to normalize for Americans that this is an issue that could very much impact them and that this does not choose people based on demographics. This is something that can happen to any human.
Absolutely.
And I think that humanizing of it has helped people to really wrap their heads around a little bit more of, yeah, sure, this could happen, but now what do I do if it does?
You're absolutely correct. And it's interesting, Chelsea. Drinking is condoned, even you'll see in high school. And sometimes parents are kind of saying, okay, you can drink, but just don't drive, or we'll supply it around like a dance or a party. There's a lot of mixed messages for kids. And we're seeing even vaping and different things starting as young as 5th and 6th grade. We're also seeing a lot of family reaction to fentanyl being in things other than, before it was like, okay, fentanyl's in heroin. And so people are using heroin, that's their choice, then they have to deal with the consequences. But wait a minute, somebody said that fentanyl could be in this drug too, but that's marijuana. So that shouldn't happen. Fentanyl can be in heroin because people that do heroin, those are like junkies, but people that do marijuana, well, that's more of an acceptable drug. So we have to, 911 because it's in marijuana. And, so we're seeing people really react now that fentanyl is coming out, that it really could be in a lot of different things. How young should families start to talk to their children about this? And what should families be aware of?
I think every family is different, right? And they have different cultures and backgrounds and norms and mores in every family. I don't know that there is an age too young to bring this up at some level. Obviously, I'm not going to talk to my 3-year-old about this. This is not impacting his life. But I would say even as young, as kindergarten, I guess the point is there is a absolutely appropriate type of conversation to have with any child, pretty much K through 18 and beyond. Think about their brains. Think about the way that they process information. If we know that 90% of development in the brain happens before, 6 or 7? That other 10% is going to keep developing until they're 25 or 26 or 27. Right. So in theory, we need to try to prevent the onset of use. We need to delay that as much as we can. But we also have to realize that in a situation, and I'm going to throw out a statistic for you because this is sort of what I'm talking about and what you're saying. According to SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the country, if they are saying that in the last month, 60% of teenagers have used an illicit drug, 60%, not 6, not 16, 60. And that 15%, and we know that that's true, nationwide. I have a hard time wrapping my head around how we're going to scale that back, right? Without some really strong interventions and prevention initiatives that are going to be rolled out. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. It's a big number to be able to try to roll back. So what realistically can we do? If we know young people are going to use at some point, or most of them are, how can we prevent addiction and keep them safe? I just want to reemphasize this: prevent addiction and keep them safe. To your point, I think you said this earlier, Jackie. If I'm 16 and I know I can buy illicit Xanax pill on the internet, absolutely we have to be educating them about what that means, what could be in it, what they should be thinking through to keep them safe. And we're not. We just say no, or we don't say anything. But we really need to be giving young people knowledge. And we have so much data around this. And we also have so many like strategies that we could use. It's just after DARE was kind of proven ineffective, we just sort of stopped educating young people or left it up to the local communities who had very limited resources around what actually works in terms of preventing substance use, or as we would say, sort of in the prevention world, I think, addressing risk factors and building protective factors. And those are things like having a strong bond with a caregiver or a mentor, having community, having whether it's a church or a synagogue or a sport, having coping skills, knowing how to redirect themselves. Like these are basic things that we should be teaching and encouraging young people. But really, so much of this has been said like, oh, okay, we need to be doing this in schools. It actually starts in the home. And so if you have parents that are raising children to be healthy, but they're struggling with trauma and anxiety, that child is going to respond to what they see and the energy in that house. So parents have to take responsibility for looking at themselves and how they're contributing to what sort of environment that they are kind of creating in the home, instead of just saying, educator, teach my kid about this, or don't teach my kid about this. We need to be looking at this way more comprehensively than we are. And actually, I just wanted to say, and I'll share this with everybody, there is a new guide from the National Council for Mental Wellbeing for providers, but I think it really has a lot of great tenets that could be contributed to parents about how youth sort of want to be communicated and engaged in conversations about this that are really very realistic. So there are resources out there. It's just getting them to the people who need them, which are the parents and the educators, of course.
Right. Let's talk about your own use. And I'm seeing more and more kids telling me, yeah, my parents now, instead of giving me a beer, they'll give me a gummy or they'll give me, something else, an edible, and we all kind of get high together. And I just want to ask you about this. And what are you seeing, that correlation between parents' use of alcohol and marijuana and their children's use later?
So, okay, I'm just going to start with this. So when I was in training to become a therapist, one of the things that I learned very early was the concept of you expect relapse from someone. So with that said, you would help somebody to create a relapse prevention plan and support them in the event that they do relapse. So in the same context, I think we need to be actually thinking about this as consumers of healthcare and consumers of information. Families expect something to occur, expect there to be an issue going on with communication or social skills. If you expect it, then you can actually work from that place and build a plan of, okay, what do I do if this happens in my family? So being more proactive.
And less shame.
Yes,
right?
No shame. Expect that this is human. Most families are going to deal with some issue with their child at some point, whether it's a conflict issue or a mental health issue or a behavioral issue. It's going to happen because this is Gen Z and they are different. Gen Z and Alpha, they are different than even me, who's an older millennial, in how they engage in the world. And it's not to say all kids are going to behave quote unquote badly. And I hate that term, but there's going to be human behaviors occurring and we need to be more prepared for it. So I guess when parents are using or drinking or they're using a substance, and they might be using with their children. So one of the reasons that we know that people learn about substance use is through modeling, right? When you see a family member drink and that you ask them about what they're drinking or what they're using, or it just sort of exists. And then, they recognize, they might be afraid to ask about it, but they recognize, when dad has a beer or 2 beers or 3 beers, I see him change and it looks like this. And I don't know if I like that. That's what they're absorbing. So I think it's, of course, every family, again, I will say every family is different. I'm not going to tell every family in this country how to raise their children. But like I said, the better we can do as families to take a look at how we're engaging in making and normalizing substance use in our homes and making slight alterations in how that happens could really make a huge difference in whether or not that child is actually going to engage in that as well. It does start in the home. So I hope that helped answer that question. I know that I went round and round there, but I think that it's got to come from that inside of the family structure.
You mentioned that earlier use can really be an indicator of longer term use or even addiction. And so I love how you said we really want to work with our kids, not starting so early and really educating on addiction. And we live in a culture where it is more acceptable to drink and use than to not, right?
Yes. Yes. And I think that though we see that across the world, we see that in Europe. We see people who are, I lived in England for a year, and what do you do at lunch? You go round the pub and you have a pint. That's a part of the culture. They don't view that as bad. We might see that as, oh, you're drinking in the middle of the day, but that's what their culture does. So who are we to say that that's wrong? But I guess to your point, Jackie, what do we know about young people? We know that they are heavily peer influenced. So you might tell them 18 different ways, I do not want you to use drugs. It's not something that we're going to accept. If you want to talk about it, I'm here for you. They might go into a situation where they don't know how to get out of it. And they might engage in that use because their friends are, or because some guy that they like is, or some girl, So we have to realize that young people are experimenting with their own behaviors, their own thoughts, but you can pull them back from it if they do it. There is a way. Just because somebody were to vape or were to use cannabis or a gummy does not mean that that's it for them. It means let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about, let's talk about your life. Let's talk about what matters most to you. Why does that matter? Let's talk about, what sort of benefits and consequences come with continuing to engage in this behavior, or how you want to feel and how you did feel when you tried it. And actually engaging in that conversation without shame and judgment can bring you closer with your child. But we don't think about it like that. We just think, why did they do this? I've always told them no. And then we personalize it. Sure, like be in that space and realize, get mad, get mad. Of course, I would be mad too if my child were using, especially after the million stories I will eventually tell him about my brother and I and what we struggled with. But then realize, okay, this is an opportunity. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a relationship strength that I can build on with my child and to help them and intervene and be proactive. And I think that that's something that we're not empowering enough parents to do.
Well, and the thing that you just made me think of, and it's a little bit of a off-ramp. A lot of these kids are getting access through social media, through Snapchat and through Instagram stories. And so I don't think parents always realize that the drug dealer is not walking down and up the street necessarily in the suburbs saying, please buy some drugs for me.
Right.
I think parents don't understand that it looks different today. So when, maybe your innocent child is struggling maybe with some depression or anxiety and they're in their room, even video games. It happens a lot through the video games. And we might say, well, it's just social media, it's just Instagram, but really being aware of what your child is exposed to, where your child's at, supervising at the appropriate level can really be an early intervention tool as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so well said. Yeah. And I think why not set a tone in your family that social media is not only going to be limited, but maybe we're going to delay the onset of when we use social media in our home. And I know that that's like sacrilege, right, to teens, because that's their whole life is digital. That's a part of who they are as a generation. It's a part of their DNA now. So yeah, but there has to be more safety conversations, just as we teach about sexual health education, or even like preventing, what to do if you feel uncomfortable at a party and you're engaging with somebody and you physically feel unsafe. We're having those conversations. Why aren't we having more conversations around social media safety? Because yes, you're right. There are people that are specifically preying on younger people on social media. And there are young people in our own community who have bought drugs on social media and they overdosed because those pills were laced with fentanyl. What I hope that parents know, and I need them to understand this, so everybody ears perked. What is in the drugs right now that even your next door neighbor could be cooking up in the basement, literally, is not even the drug that you think you're buying. Like when we take a look at the baggies of heroin at Live for Lolly that we have, maybe 20% of it is heroin, maybe. The rest of it is baby laxative, castor oil. I mean, it's totally diluted with other things. And then a very small amount of it is usually contaminated with fentanyl. But we have to know what's going on the street right now. Closing your ears to understanding the drug market is not a good decision to make because of everything that you're saying. So I think it's so comprehensive. We have to understand what's actually going on out there in order to provide our children and our teens with the right information and provide our families with the right information. The right information meaning literally telling them the truth and reality. I don't know if I told you this, Jackie, but I am working on a bill right here in the state of Illinois to expand and improve the guidelines for drug education, not just in schools, but providing resources for families, for parents, for caregivers, for communities. So a more comprehensive approach beyond like what you would do in a classroom or in a school environment. And a part of those recommendations is actually going to be including for a certain group, which is 10th, 11th, 12th grade, what Narcan is, what fentanyl test strips are. And maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that that conversation could be possible, but I know that it is now because the number of young people in our overdose death data, at least in Lake County and suburban Cook County, we're seeing a very concerning increase in under 18 overdose deaths.
Wow.
And that has to be something that we all pay attention to if we have teens. But then again, just as we're talking about, it goes back to what do you say? How do you say it? How do you engage? What would be best for your child? And that's really where parents, I think, get really stuck. Yeah, it's a lot, but it's also you can put a plan together. And I don't think parents or police or educators feel that that exists right now, but it does. We just have to be able to provide those resources to community members understanding what do experts recommend around this.
I know you've been instrumental in Narcan and getting it out, and that is something that's so important for the reversal of an overdose. Do you want to talk a little bit about it and where it should be, and should parents have it at home? What are your thoughts?
I mean, most people know someone who uses street drugs. And when I say street drugs, I'm talking about not just heroin. I'm talking about, cocaine, MDMA, meth, anything that you could buy illicitly. All of it, we're seeing samples when we're checking drugs at Live for Lolly that fentanyl is in all of it. So my perspective is everybody should be carrying it. All villages, all public buildings should have it. Businesses should have it. Schools should have it. Teachers need to be educated on the use of it. Yes, because if we know right now that a person is more likely to die from an overdose than any other accidental death under the age of 50, that means everyone is susceptible to it. So I think we have to realize that it's not a question of do we, it's absolutely yes. And who is your local Narcan provider? Like that's where we need to be going with this, because you never know when you come across someone who has overdosed, whether it's on the freeway because they pulled over to the side of the road and they're knotted out and they're ODing, or in a library or in the bathroom. That happened. And so I'm working on legislation to expand those types of services and identify communities where we can use more harm reduction based strategies like increasing access to syringe exchange programs so that people don't contract HIV and hepatitis C, which also are often Narcan distribution and fentanyl test strip distribution programs. And we're even looking at setting up overdose prevention sites in the city of Chicago where you have open air drug markets, and actually starting to see how that could work in Chicago because that's where the epicenter is. So there's a lot, but yes, young people and families, if you have a concern about someone in your life, getting Narcan from a local drug overdose prevention program provider or the pharmacy is not a bad idea. So I guess, yes, everybody should have it. That's my feedback in this day and age until we have been able to turn the tide on this.
I think, Chelsea, your expertise and your personal touch on this, I think you've helped so many. And I'd like to actually bring you back for a part 2 because there's so much information. And while it is nice to have your head in the sand, it's not beneficial. And in the end, having healthy families, and you really got to address some of this stuff, because if it's not your child, it'll be your neighbor, it'll be your brother, it'll be your sister. I guarantee you it is hard to meet someone that has not been impacted by addiction. And my children had the pleasure of first meeting you. I think you actually had a Nickelodeon star, Gibby. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So you had brought in Gibby, and my husband and my daughters were all excited to go see Gibby. And so they went to your event. We have a picture of them with Gibby still on my daughter's refrigerator. And It was such a great way to touch kids. And I love how Chelsea said, our kids are only going to be as healthy as we are. The more we can seek help for ourselves, the healthier our families will be. But I thank you so much, Chelsea, for being here. And I know Robin has a few questions to ask you in closing.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Here we go. The 3 questions that we ask every guest. You may choose to answer 1, 2, or you can answer all 3 questions. It's your choice. Here we go. Number 1, tell us one of your funny parenting stories. Now, this could be you as a parent, or this could be in your childhood, something your parents did. Number 2, what TV, family, or movie would you want to be a part of and why? And then number 3, what does successful parenting mean to you? Take it away, Chelsea. 1, 2, or all 3,
gosh.
whatever you want.
Okay, I'm going to go with number 3. I think that successful parenting means to me parents who approach their children and their unit that they're creating with love and compassion and empathy. And that includes for yourself. When you have love and compassion and empathy for yourself, and you learn about how the things in your life have affected you, you can create an even more healthy home and children who are resilient and ready to go out into the world asking why, strong character and strong values. That's what successful parenting looks like to me.
I love it. Thank you so much. I am still just thinking about the 60% of teenagers that use illicit drugs. That is in my mind. It's going to be all day probably there thinking about it. And I love that you said keep them safe. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for joining us today. I'm sure our listeners has received a lot of information. We'll drop any of those resources in our description. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Jackie.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us, and make sure to subscribe and like us to catch our next episode, where we will take you on a journey to find new ways of successful parenting.